Hello, it's Ruby, and today I'm going to be doing a video that I have been meaning to do for a really long time. I feel like it is overdue, and I think it's something I should have spoken about earlier. Mental health is one of those things that I really do think we should be having a continuous conversation about. It's been so stigmatized for so long, and obviously we have seen shifts in cultural reception to mental health, especially in the realm of, middle grade and YA fiction. We've seen loads of books being published about mental health. Young people seem to be so much more open when speaking about mental health. We're in a really great position at the moment, I think, as a society when it comes to talking about it, but that doesn't mean that we're there yet, and so continuing that conversation is so important. So today I thought I would just do a really honest chat about mental health. So I asked on Instagram for just random questions about mental health, and I got so many. It took me a good 20 minutes just to read them. I've made a list of some of these questions. I don't know how many we'll get through, but I'm hoping we will get through quite a few. Okay, so I'm actually going to start this video by talking to you about therapy, because there were lots of questions about therapy. I actually saw a therapist for the first time when I was in year 9. I didn't want to go and see a therapist. It was my mum's decision, and my mum was really worried because I was getting really stressed about school, and I would have these breakdowns where I'd be so scared that I was going to fail. So my mum took me to see a therapist, but I really didn't want to be there, and so I just kind of nodded along to everything she said and pretended that I agreed with her, and it's really bad, I pretended to do these exercises and things so that she'd think I was all okay. And literally at the end of our second session she was like, you know what, you've gone through the whole of CBT in a week. I think you're okay. And so I didn't go back again. That's just because I don't think at that time I was in a space to admit that I maybe was struggling with my mental health, because I really do think that with therapy, one of the really important components is that you actually are willing to go in and commit to it and try and change the way that you think. And if you're not committed to that, it's really hard to actually see any change. That was in year 9, and then when I was in year 12 I went and saw another therapist. Up until only a few months into university, I had a huge fear of being left home alone, like in the house by myself. So even when I was 18 and I should have been absolutely okay with being in the house by myself, I found it really, really hard, and I got very, very anxious and really panicky, and I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I'd always hide. I was so scared that someone was going to break in, and I know that's really irrational looking back, like that wasn't going to happen, but it really, really scared me. And so because I was 17 and my mum was like, you really should be able to be left home alone, she took me to see a psychologist, and I got on really well with this therapist. So I actually saw that therapist for a really long time, but it was really on and off. So my last session with that therapist was in October 2019, so that was like really, really recent. But I didn't have like weekly sessions or anything. At the beginning I had fortnightly sessions, and then after 6 sessions moved to having them maybe once every 3 months, once every 4 months, just as a check-in. All of the therapy I've had is private. Like I'm in a really, really lucky position where I was able to get private therapy, as opposed to CAMS, which is for young people in the UK. It's like covered by the NHS. And at one point we decided that I wasn't going to be able to do fortnightly sessions. My therapist did say, I really think you should go see someone at CAMS instead, because I wouldn't be able to have those regular sessions, and she said that she thought it would be best if I went to see someone regularly on the NHS. But I felt like I developed a really good relationship with this therapist, and so I didn't want to do that, and I decided to have these like really irregular, like really spaced out sessions instead. I don't think that's ideal, but also I always felt like I had that support system and that network there, even if I didn't see her very regularly. I liked the flexibility of that. But then in October 2019 I started seeing someone down in Exeter instead. So I found a therapist. One of the questions actually was, how do you find therapists? So the first therapist that I saw, my mum found out about that through friends. I found my therapist in Exeter through this like search for counsellors website. I'll leave it linked down below, and then it tells you what each of these therapists specializes in, and then you can contact them directly. I sent messages to 3 therapists. 2 of them said that they couldn't take anyone else on at the moment. One of them got back to me and said that she had some availability. So I asked if I could do a phone call with her beforehand, because I think it's important to feel like you've got a good personal relationship with someone before you start doing therapy with them. I had that phone call, got on really well with her, and genuinely she was amazing. Like, she really helped with my mental health. I actually finished therapy really soon before lockdown, so I saw her for a good 4 months, which is a long time. Yeah, I think that's everything I'll talk about in terms of therapy. Hopefully that's useful. Okay, so I'm going to answer some of these questions now. Have you ever had a panic attack? Yes, I have. So I've had 2 proper panic attacks, and both of them were actually on the same day. It was at school, and I had a panic attack in my physics lesson. And actually, honestly, it's like such a silly reason. This just shows how caught up I was in expectations from teachers and needing to get everything right and like perfectionism. Basically, I think it was, we had 2 sheets of homework to do, and I'd only done one part. I just must have not written down the second part of the homework or something, and so I didn't do the second half of the homework, and then our teacher was collecting it in, and I realised my mistake and I had a panic attack. Yeah, I couldn't breathe, and I left the classroom, and I was taken to the nurse, still having the panic attack, and then the nurse sat me down and helped me calm down and things, and she said, you know, go home, like, it's you've had a bad panic attack, it's probably for the best that you go home now. But of course I was like, no, can't miss my lessons this afternoon, so I stayed in school. But then I actually ended up having another panic attack later on that day. So basically this was one of the times I was being bullied, and it wasn't really bad, like it wasn't the worst bullying that I've faced. For some reason it really badly strained my mental health, and I don't know if that's also because of the pressure of doing GCSEs and things. I remember I just had this really bad month. I felt so anxious and scared, and like I was panicking whenever I'd walk in the corridors. I was going to see these people, and I know that I was just so not myself. So it was in the midst of this that I had both panic attacks, and something had happened at lunch break, and I was thinking about it, and the whole way through assembly I couldn't concentrate, and then I left assembly and I was finding it harder to breathe, and I found myself starting to panic even more. I was with a friend. She was like, oh Ruby, oops, I think you're having a panic attack again. I was like, no, it's fine, I'm okay, I need to get to chemistry. Kept on walking, but it just kept on getting worse, and I couldn't breathe. Then I started crying because I was really scared because I couldn't breathe. If you've had panic attacks, you know what this is like. I started really panicking because I couldn't breathe, so I started crying. And so I sat down on the corridor because I was getting really lightheaded, and it was so scary. Like, thinking about it now, it was so scary. Yeah, basically that was my second panic attack. A teacher found me. Again, the nurse came over and said, you know, do you want to go home? Both of these panic attacks, they were public ones. Like, people saw me having the panic attack, which I don't know. It's nice because people are really kind in response to it, but it was also really embarrassing because I didn't want to have a panic attack, and the fact that people were watching me made me feel more self-conscious because obviously I'm crying and like my face is really red. And yeah, so they're the 2 main big panic attacks I've had. I haven't had a huge panic attack since then. Basically, when I had those panic attacks, the nurse taught me through those breathing exercises to like slow down your breathing so that you don't feel like you're suffocating and you don't feel like you're getting enough air. In future, when it happened, I just did what the nurse told me to do that time, and it actually really helped. I've definitely got close to being at that stage before, but I always bring in those breathing exercises, so I haven't had a big panic attack since then. Do you journal? I do journal. I find journaling is really good for my mental health, actually, and I would hugely recommend it for anyone who's struggling with their mental health because it helps to rationalize your thoughts and it feels like you're telling someone, and I do really like that. So, has your mental health ever affected your results? It has, actually. In year 13 there were certain circumstances that meant that my mental health was in a really bad place, and it meant that I really underperformed on these pre-mock tests. It can affect your results, and sometimes it's out of your control, and sometimes the more important thing is not the exams and the academics, but it's looking after yourself. And sometimes you're not in the right state of mind to actually be able to perform to your best ability, and that's okay. And don't beat yourself up about that, because if you tried your best in the state that you were in at that moment, there's nothing you can do. I really beat myself up about it after those pre-mock exams, because I thought, you know, if only I'd been in a better mental state, I would have done much better. But I was in as good a mental state as I could have been at that point. Counts for so much. So please don't beat yourself up about that, because I did that and it's not worth it. Actually, coincidentally, this is the reason why I really recommend mindfulness and being really present before an exam. Everything I do before an exam is focused not on revision, but on making sure that I am in as good a mental state as possible, because I know how much being in a bad mental state and being stressed and anxious about exams and academics will affect how I perform on that test, and I know it will from experience. Are you always happy? Do you feel pressured to be happy because of social media? I don't think it's a secret that social media only shows a very limited worldview. However much we might want for it to be incredibly and entirely accurate, it can never be entirely accurate, because even when we choose to show lowlights, we're still tailoring those lowlights. Even though I do try to be congruent when it comes to mental health, I won't always, and I really think that that's mainly due to the fact that for me, when I'm having a bad mental health day, I find it really exasperating for it if I log into my social media. So if I'm having a bad mental health day, I won't go on Instagram. So am I always happy? No one's always happy. I think the issue with happiness is it fails to be happiness, and it fails to be something worthwhile and meaningful if there isn't an opposite action and feeling to counteract it. So I could never be happy, I don't think, if I didn't also sometimes feel sad. Some days I will feel very, very sad, and that is completely normal. Everyone feels like that. So no one is happy all of the time. I'm definitely not happy all of the time. I would say I'm a pretty positive person. I try to be happy. There's this amazing quote by from Anne of Green Gables, where Anne says, if you make up your mind firmly to do something and to be happy, you can feel happy. And I do think that that's true to a certain extent. If I'm not feeling happy, I will try my best to make myself happy, and actually a lot of the time it does end up working. So yeah, it's important to be open, so I'm going to talk to you about this. I've actually in the past really struggled with like being scared of germs and things, and so that means like compulsive hand washing, which I have had in bursts. It's happened a couple times at university. It'll only usually be for like a month maybe. The first time I got it was when I was in year 12, and I was really embarrassed by it because it was obviously, I felt weird, the fact that I felt like I had to like always wash my hands, and the fact that I couldn't think about anything else. I have struggled with obsessive compulsive tendencies in the past, and I definitely do still. But it's worse sometimes than it is at other times. Always when I think about it, I wash my hands, which is so bad because you shouldn't give in to compulsions, but it's so much easier said than done. It's actually hard talking about mental health, and that's really bad. I wish it weren't so hard to talk about mental health, because it just should be easier to talk about. I'm going to move on to some of the philosophical questions now, which hopefully can also be helpful. What are my thoughts on the media's portrayal of mental health? This is a really good question, especially because mental health, as I said, is so much more prevalent in the media than it's ever been before. I think it really does depend. The issue that I have with mental health in the media, films and books, is that it is often glamorized, and there are certain mental health illnesses which are spoken about a lot more than others, the ones that are easier to glamorize. So things like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, these are so much more prevalent in middle grade and YA mental health literature, and OCD as well, I really do think is glamorized in texts and in the media, because it's linked to this idea of perfection. In all honesty, like, I've read books before which have been triggering for my obsessive compulsive tendencies. I do have a problem with some portrayals. I think some of it's really, really good. There are some really accurate portrayals of OCD especially, which I've seen. The best two I've read about OCD are Turtles All the Way Down by John Green and Multiple Choice. Also, I thought Kissing Doorknobs spoke about OCD really, really well. But also, I think it's amazing that mental health is being spoken about so much more in the media, and I think that was very much needed. The fact that young people are so much more, especially, you know, people in early secondary school, are so much more aware of mental health because of the literature. Like, when I was in my last year of school, I was amazed at how people in year 7 and 8 would be like, oh, I'm just going to see the counsellor today, and there wouldn't be any shame there that they were going to go see the counsellor. Whereas when I was in year 7, I never actually went to see the counsellor at school, but if you went to see the counsellor, it was like, hush, 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 don't tell anyone. Like, people would think you're weird if you go see the counsellor. And I do really think that that change is due to middle grade literature being so much more open about it. So I do think it's a good thing. I just think there is a fine line, and sometimes it can be triggering. This is just a matter of opinion. Obviously, I'm not speaking as like a psychology student or a psychologist or anyone who's trained in psychology, but I personally don't agree with labels. Distinctly, if they can help you, then I think it's a good thing. But just societally, the fact that we segment people with mental illnesses into their own little sections, I think that actually can be quite debilitating when it comes to empathy and when it comes to connecting with people. I think having a model of mental health where it's a spectrum means that we can each position ourselves somewhere on the spectrum, and people who suffer more severely with that aren't ostracized for it. They're not seen as totally separate, but there's like a bond of similarity. I just think that's societally useful for preventing separation, but that's just a personal opinion. And actually one of the other questions was about like the medicalization in terms of like using drugs for psychology. I know people who have really benefited from taking medication, and so I'm not going to sit here and say that like medication is a bad thing, because it can be a really good thing. I think the danger is when when a prescription is used in the place of therapy and spoken therapy, because the research does show, and I've read around this, the research does show that it's better for people to have long-term therapy alongside medication as opposed to just being given medication. Whereas especially in deprived areas, you see that there is like over-prescription of drugs for treating mental health issues when those people would benefit more from therapy. And so I do think that is a huge problem with the current system, and obviously the NHS is really burdened and therapy is expensive. Like ideally, I think there should be a trained psychologist in every single workplace in the UK, in the world, every single school. Everyone should be able to access mental health care. Let's say it was necessary for in every single firm there to be one psychologist per 50 people, and then that psychologist would see someone who works at the company like every 2 weeks. That way everyone in the whole country would have therapy. Everyone would have access to therapy every 2 weeks, which the research finds is extremely useful. Logistically, I really think that could work, like every single workplace having that, and then having NHS resources available for those who don't work, who can't work. But also I know that that's much easier said than done. So that's what I think should happen, but realistically I don't think it would. So thank you so much for watching this really open discussion about mental health. I hope that it was in some way, it's not really going to be helpful, but I hope in some way it's comforting, because everyone struggles with their mental health and I think we need to be open about it. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a productive week.